moment you notice you're overthinking, you try to stop. You tell yourself to focus, to decide, to just pick something and move. And then somehow it gets worse. That's not a coincidence. The effort to stop overthinking is itself more thinking, and it feeds the exact loop you're trying to break. You're not stuck because you don't have enough information. You're stuck because you have too much, most of it recycled. Every decision you're sitting on right now has already been analysed, reanalyzed, second-guessed, and run through 3 different mental frameworks, and you still don't feel clear. That's not an intelligence problem, that's a full cup problem. 2,500 years ago, Lao Tzu described exactly this state and left behind a way out that takes 5 minutes. Not a philosophy lecture, not a breathing exercise, a concrete reset you can run today, before your next meeting, before your next decision. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to do it. There's a story that gets passed around in Zen circles about a professor who visits a master to ask about enlightenment. The master starts pouring tea into the professor's cup, and he just keeps pouring. The tea overflows, spills across the table onto the floor. The professor stares at it. The master says, "You are like this cup. How can I show you anything unless you first empty it?" Most people hear that story and think it's about humility, about being open-minded. It's not. It's a diagnosis. The cup isn't a metaphor for ego. It's a metaphor for cognitive capacity. A vessel that's already full cannot take in anything new, no matter how useful or accurate the new thing is. Here's what this looks like in practice for anyone running a business, managing a team, or carrying real professional weight. You've been trained your entire career to accumulate more data before the decision, more contingency plans before the launch, more expert opinions before the pivot. Every framework you've learned, every failure you've processed, every lesson you've filed away, it all stays in the cup. You never empty it, you just keep adding, because that's what high performance looks like from the outside. But there's a point where the cup is so full that adding one more thing doesn't help you think better. It just adds pressure, and under that pressure, your thinking doesn't expand. It loops. This is where the neuroscience gets interesting, and I'll keep it simple. When your brain is running on accumulated, unprocessed stress, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that does actual reasoning and problem solving, starts going quiet. It doesn't shut off completely, but it loses bandwidth. What stays active is the part of your brain scanning for threats, replaying past outcomes, running worst-case scenarios. That's not analysis. That's your nervous system trying to protect you by recycling everything it already knows. So, when you're sitting with a decision that should be straightforward and you can't move, it's not because you haven't thought hard enough. It's because the part of your brain that could actually resolve, it has been crowded out by the part that keeps running the old tape. Most productivity advice responds to this by giving you another framework, another decision matrix, another prioritization method. And those tools aren't bad, but they all have the same flaw. They're trying to pour more into a cup that's already overflowing. They skip the one step that actually matters, which is creating space before you try to think clearly. Lao Tzu built his entire cognitive philosophy around this inversion. The solution comes before the strategy. The emptying comes before the answer. And the reason this idea has survived 2,500 years isn't because monks found it comforting. It's because anyone who has ever actually tried it, under real pressure, with real stakes, found that it worked in a way that adding more thinking never did. So, what does emptying actually mean, and why does it only take 5 minutes? Before I give you the practice, I need to correct something, because the most common version of this idea will actually make the problem worse if you apply it wrong. When most people hear empty your mind, they go straight to meditation. They sit down, close their eyes, try to push thoughts out, and then spend 10 minutes watching thoughts flood back in faster than they can clear them. Then they decide they're bad at meditation and go back to overthinking. That's not what Lao Tzu was describing, and it's not what this practice asks you to do. The actual concept comes from chapter 11 of the Tao Te Ching. Lao Tzu writes about three things: a wheel, a room, and a cup. The wheel works because of the empty space at its hub, not the spokes. The room works because of the empty space inside it, not the walls. The cup works because of the hollow, not the clay. His point is that function lives in the void. The useful part of any vessel is the part that holds nothing. Applied to your mind, this doesn't mean achieving some blank, thought-free state. It means something far more specific and far more doable, suspending your current conclusions long enough to actually see what's in front of you. Not erasing thoughts, suspending the conclusions you've already drawn from them. That distinction matters because of what's really happening when you're stuck in an overthinking loop. You're not thinking about your problem, you're thinking about your previous thoughts about your problem. Last week you formed a conclusion about the risk. 2 days ago, that conclusion got reinforced by a conversation that went badly. Yesterday you added 3 more layers of what if on top of that. So today, when you sit down to think, you're not actually looking at the problem, you're looking at a stack of interpretations you built over the past 3 weeks, and the original problem is buried somewhere at the bottom. This is what a full cup of old tea looks like in a professional context. Take a founder trying to decide whether to change their pricing. They've talked to 5 customers, read 12 articles, run the numbers twice, and they still can't move. The reason isn't missing data. The reason is that 3 weeks ago they decided raising prices felt too risky, and every piece of information since then has been filtered through that conclusion. The cup isn't full of the current situation. It's full of who they were when they were scared 3 weeks ago. The 5-minute method doesn't try to fix that by adding better data or a sharper framework. It targets the loop itself, not the content of your thoughts, but the recursive structure that keeps them spinning. You interrupt the recursion first, and then from that gap, you look at what's actually true right now with fresh eyes, not fear-filtered ones. This is why Lao Tzu's concept translates so directly to modern decision-making under pressure. He wasn't prescribing passivity. He was describing the cognitive condition that makes clear perception possible. You can't see the current situation clearly when you're seeing it through the lens of every previous situation that felt similar. The cup has to come down before the tea can settle. So here's the exact practice, what you do, in what order, and why each step is doing something specific to break the loop. The 5-minute empty cup reset, step by step. This is not a relaxation technique. I want to be clear about that before you start, because the way you frame what you're doing changes how your brain responds to it. Relaxation is what you do when the pressure is over. This is what you do when the pressure is live, and you need to think straight inside of it. It's a cognitive interrupt, same as rebooting a frozen computer, and it runs in 4 steps. Step 1 is the dump, and it takes about 90 seconds. You pick up a pen, you open to a blank page, and you write down everything currently running in your head without filtering any of it. Not a to-do list, not organized notes, everything. The half-formed worry about the conversation from this morning, the 3 competing versions of the decision you're sitting on, the thing someone said last Tuesday that's still sitting wrong, the thing you keep forgetting to do. You write it all out until the page has it, and your head doesn't. The reason this works isn't therapeutic, it's structural. Your brain keeps recycling the same thoughts, partly because it's afraid they'll disappear if it stops holding them. The moment you externalize them, you break that grip. The loop needs your attention to keep spinning, and the dump pulls your attention out of the loop and onto the paper. 90 seconds is usually enough. If you're still going at 2 minutes, keep going, but most of what's driving the stuck feeling surfaces fast. Step 2 is the release cue, and it runs for about 60 seconds. This is the most underestimated part. You do one deliberate physical action that signals a state change. Stand up, walk to a window, wash your hands slowly. It doesn't matter which one, but it has to be physical and it has to be intentional. Lao Tzu's concept of wu wei, non-forcing, wasn't purely mental. He wrote about it as a quality of movement, of meeting the world without resistance. A body-based cue works because your nervous system responds to physical signals faster than it responds to mental decisions. You're telling your system through your body that the previous state is done. That gap between the dump and the set is what makes the next step possible. Step 3 is the empty sit, and it's 2 minutes. You're not meditating. You're not trying to think about nothing. You're just not adding anything. Sit somewhere quiet, put the notebook face down, and don't reach for your phone. Don't run solutions. Don't plan. The only instruction is, don't pour anything into the cup for 2 minutes. This is where most people feel uncomfortable, and that discomfort is real and worth naming. Your brain will read the stillness as unproductivity and push back hard with, you should be doing something. That feeling isn't a sign the practice isn't working. It's the old clutter pushing back because you've stopped feeding it. Stay with it. Step 4 is the single question, and it takes 30 seconds. When the 2 minutes are up, you re-enter your thinking with one question only. What do I actually know right now? Not what you're afraid might happen. Not what you think you should do. Not what you knew 3 weeks ago when the situation looked different. What is actually true at this moment as far as you can see it. Write down whatever comes up, or just sit with the answer. You're not looking for a full decision. You're looking for ground, one true thing you can stand on. You can run this between back-to-back meetings by stepping outside for 5 minutes. You can run it before a difficult conversation by sitting in your car for 5 minutes before walking in. You can run it at the end of a day when everything has piled up and nothing feels clear. Any moment you notice the loop starting, that's the moment to use it, not after you've been spinning for an hour, right at the start, when the interruption costs you almost nothing. People assume that Tao Te Ching is a spiritual text written for people who had already stepped away from the world. That's wrong. Lao Tzu wrote it for rulers, for people making decisions that affected thousands of lives, managing courts full of competing factions, navigating wars and droughts and political collapse. The philosophy didn't emerge from a monastery. It emerged from watching what happens to leaders under sustained real pressure, and noticing which ones stayed clear and which ones broke down under the weight of their own thinking. That context matters because it means the empty cup idea wasn't designed for stillness. It was designed for exactly the conditions you're already in. One of the core principles running beneath the 5-minute reset is what Lao Tzu called pu, which translates roughly as uncarved wood. The image is a block of wood before any craftsman has shaped it. It holds the potential for every possible form because it hasn't been committed to any one form yet. Lao Tzu used this as a description of the mind at its most capable state, not ignorant, not blank, but uncommitted to a fixed interpretation. When you run the reset, you're not trying to forget what you know. You're trying to get back to the moment before your stress response locked your perception into one particular reading of the situation. You're returning to the uncarved state, where more than one outcome is still visible. This connects directly to what cognitive science found when researchers started studying rumination seriously. Rumination is the clinical name for what most people call overthinking, and the research on it is consistent. The longer you stay in a rumination loop, the less access you have to the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for flexible thinking, weighing options, and generating novel solutions. What stays active instead is a network associated with self-referential processing, essentially your brain running simulations of past events and projecting them onto the future. It feels like thinking. It produces the sensation of mental effort, but it's not generating anything new. It's replaying and repackaging what already exists in the cup. The 5-minute window breaks that cycle without triggering your brain's avoidance response. Shorter than 5 minutes, and the interrupt doesn't fully land, the nervous system doesn't register a genuine state change. Longer than 10, and your brain starts treating the pause as procrastination, which creates its own layer of anxiety on top of the original loop. 5 minutes sits in a specific gap where the stress cycle actually has time to reset, but not enough time for avoidance to take root. That's not intuition. It maps onto what stress physiology research shows about cortisol and the time required for the acute stress response to begin clearing when the trigger is removed. The deeper logic Lao Tzu kept returning to across the Tao Te Ching is this: emptiness isn't the absence of something useful. It's the condition that makes anything useful possible. The cup's hollow isn't a flaw in the design. It's what makes the cup a cup. A mind packed with recycled conclusions isn't a sharp mind working hard. It's a full vessel with nowhere left to receive anything. The reset doesn't make you think less. It makes you think from a different starting point, one where what's actually happening right now has room to land. The reset works. That's not the hard part. The hard part is what happens 3 days later when the cup is full again and you're back in the same loop, wondering if the whole thing was a fluke. It wasn't a fluke. The cup fills back up because filling is the default. Every conversation you have, every problem you absorb, every decision you defer adds something to the vessel. That's not a character flaw. That's just what an active mind inside a demanding life does. The question isn't how to stop the cup from filling. It's whether emptying becomes as automatic as filling. This is where most people stop short. They use the reset once, it works, they feel clear for a day, and then they wait until they're stuck again before they try it, which means they're always using it reactively, always after the loop has already been running for hours or days. Lao Tzu described something different. Chapter 16 of the Tao Te Ching opens with this: return to the root. He wasn't describing a recovery from a crisis. He was describing a rhythm, a constant returning to the original state before accumulation sets back in. The Chinese word he used implies motion, specifically the motion of going back, like water returning to its source, not arriving somewhere and staying, returning repeatedly as a practice rather than a rescue. The practical shift this asks for is small, but it cuts against everything high-performance culture tells you. Right now, you probably treat thinking as the primary activity and emptying as the interruption. You empty when you're desperate enough. Lao Tzu's model inverts that. Emptiness is the baseline you maintain, and thinking is what you do from inside that clarity. One empty moment in the morning before the day loads in, one before a decision with real weight behind it, one at the end of the day before you carry the residue into tomorrow. Not because each one is a dramatic intervention, but because each one prevents the accumulation from going unaddressed long enough to become a loop. The people who build this into their routine consistently don't talk about it the way you'd expect. They don't describe feeling calmer. They describe seeing things faster, deciding with less friction, catching their own assumptions earlier. That's clarification, not relaxation, which is exactly the distinction Lao Tzu drew between Wu Wei and passivity. The practice isn't doing less, it's thinking from a cleaner starting point more often. The problem was never that you weren't thinking hard enough. The cup was already full, and full cups don't receive anything, no matter how good the thinking is that you're trying to pour into them. Emptiness isn't the opposite of productivity. It's what makes productivity possible, which is the one idea Lao Tzu kept returning to across 81 chapters written for people carrying real weight in a real world, not monks looking for peace. Before your next high-stakes decision, run the reset, not after you've been spinning for an hour, before when the loop is just starting and the interrupt costs you almost nothing. 4 steps, 5 minutes, one clear question at the end.